She thought she owned the world, or at least my driveway. Karen and her gold-digging mom believed rules didn't apply to them. They acted like queens of the neighborhood, flaunting their expensive handbags, fake smiles, and entitlement as if everyone else were just peasants living on their turf. It started with little things, cutting across my lawn, leaving trash on the curb, blasting loud music at night. But then it escalated to the one thing I couldn't ignore, parking in my driveway like it was theirs. Every morning I'd wake up to find their shiny cars blocking me in, as if my property belonged to them. When I confronted them, Karen smirked, and her mom sneered, telling me, "It's just a driveway, don't be so dramatic." That was their mistake. See, entitlement has a limit, and I was done being pushed around. They wanted a show of power. I gave them one. I called the tow company, and within minutes both their cars were hauled away while the whole neighborhood watched. Their screams echoed down the street, but I didn't flinch. For the first time they weren't in control, and the look on their faces was priceless. What happened after shocked everyone and turned this neighborhood drama into the revenge story nobody would forget. When I first moved into the neighborhood, I thought I had found the perfect spot. The houses were neat, the lawns were well kept, and most of the neighbors greeted me with smiles and waves. My little house sat on a corner, a lot with a wide driveway, something I'd been proud of because I hated the idea of hunting for street parking after long days at work. At the time, I had no idea that this driveway would become the battlefield for a war I never asked for. It started small, almost harmless. One morning I walked outside to find a shiny silver SUV parked halfway across the end of my driveway. It wasn't fully blocking me, but it was enough to make pulling out awkward. I brushed it off, figuring maybe a guest had parked there overnight and would be gone soon. Sure enough, by evening the SUV was gone, and I didn't think much of it. But then it happened again and again. Each time, the car belonged to the same household, Karen and her mother. Karen lived 3 houses down with her flashy attitude and endless drama. She was in her mid-30s, though she carried herself like a spoiled teenager who believed the world revolved around her. Her mom, meanwhile, was the kind of woman who wore heavy jewelry in the middle of the afternoon, spoke loudly, enough for the whole block to hear, and carried herself like royalty. People whispered about her being a gold digger, latching onto men with money, but I didn't care about gossip. What I cared about was my driveway. The third time I found their cars blocking me in, I left a polite note. I wrote, "Hi, please don't block my driveway. Thanks for understanding." I slid it under the wiper and walked away. That night, when I took out my trash, I saw Karen and her mom standing by the SUV, laughing as they crumpled the note and tossed it on the ground. I felt my jaw tighten, but I told myself to stay calm. Some people didn't understand boundaries until they were reminded more than once. The next morning, though, their arrogance hit a new level. I woke up, dressed for work, and headed out with my coffee, only to find not one but 2 cars in my driveway, the SUV and a black luxury sedan I hadn't seen before. Both were parked right in the middle like they owned the place. My heart sank, followed quickly by anger. This wasn't an accident. This was deliberate. I marched down the street and knocked on their door. Karen opened it with her usual smirk. She had oversized sunglasses perched on her head and was sipping from a tumbler like she was lounging at a resort instead of standing in her doorway at 8 in the morning. "Karen," I said, trying to keep my tone even, "your cars are blocking my driveway. I need you to move them." She raised an eyebrow as if I had just insulted her. "Relax, we'll move them later. It's not that big of a deal." Behind her, her mom appeared draped in gold chains and holding a mug of coffee. She glanced at me with that smug look only entitled people seem to perfect. "Oh, don't be so dramatic," she added. "It's just a driveway. You've got plenty of space." Plenty of space. My driveway was completely blocked. I felt the heat rise in my chest, but I forced myself to breathe. "I have to go to work. I need you to move the cars now." Karen rolled her eyes and muttered something under her breath, but eventually she handed her mom the keys. They took their sweet time walking back down the street, chatting as if this was an inconvenience for them, not me. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, the SUV and the sedan were moved. That day at work, I couldn't concentrate. The disrespect ate at me, like a splinter I couldn't pull out. Who parks in someone else's driveway and laughs about it? I replayed the conversation in my head over and over. Their dismissive tone, their smirks, that sneer, "It's just a driveway." I told myself maybe this would be the end of it. Maybe now that I had confronted them directly, they'd think twice. But deep down, I knew better. People like Karen and her mom didn't learn from warnings. They thrived on control, on pushing boundaries just to see if they could, and I was right. A week later I came home late from running errands. It was dark, and the street was quiet. I turned the corner to my house and immediately felt my stomach drop. Both their cars were back in my driveway, side by side like they owned the entire property. The sight made my hands grip the steering wheel so tight that my knuckles went white. I parked on the street, fuming. I didn't knock this time. I didn't leave a note. I just went inside and stared at the clock, waiting for morning. My house felt smaller with the weight of my anger pressing against the walls. By midnight I made up my mind I wasn't going to let this slide again. The next morning, I caught Karen outside watering her lawn, dressed in workout clothes. She clearly had no intention of actually working out, and I walked up to her calmly, though every part of me wanted to yell. "Karen," I said, "this is the last time I'm asking nicely. Stop parking in my driveway. If you do it again, I'll have the cars towed." She froze for half a second, then broke into laughter. "You wouldn't dare." Her mom appeared again, leaning on the porch railing like she'd been waiting for the show to start. "Oh, sweetheart," she said, "you're new here. This neighborhood has always been ours. Don't think you can come in and start making rules." That line sealed it for me. I wasn't imagining things. They really believed they owned this block. They really thought I was beneath them, just some rookie neighbor they could push around. I gave Karen one last look, then turned on my heel and walked back home without another word. As I closed my door, I already knew what I was going to do next time. I'd been patient, polite, and reasonable. None of it mattered to them. The only language people like Karen and her mother understood was consequence. And soon, they were going to learn exactly what that meant. For a few days after my last warning, things were quiet. My driveway stayed clear, and I thought maybe, just maybe, my words had finally sunk in. But entitlement doesn't fade that easily, and people like Karen and her mother never change. Overnight, it was a Thursday morning when it finally happened again. I woke up earlier than usual, hoping to beat the traffic and get some extra work done at the office. The sun had just started to rise, and the air was cool and crisp. I stepped outside with my coffee, feeling good about the day ahead. I saw them, both cars, the silver SUV and the black luxury sedan, parked right across my driveway as if they were mocking me. For a moment I stood there, staring in disbelief. My chest tightened and I felt my pulse quicken. It wasn't just inconvenient anymore, it was deliberate disrespect, a challenge. They had heard my warning, they had laughed at it, and now they were calling my bluff. I set my coffee cup on the hood of my car and pulled out my phone. I didn't hesitate this time. I scrolled to the tow company's number I had saved days earlier, just in case. A calm voice answered, and I gave them my address. "Two vehicles parked illegally in my driveway," I said, my voice steady even though adrenaline surged through me. "Yes, both need to be removed." The dispatcher promised a truck would be there in less than 30 minutes. I hung up, leaned against my car, and waited for once. I wasn't anxious. I wasn't second-guessing myself. A strange sense of calm washed over me, the kind that comes when you know you're finally taking action. About 20 minutes later I heard the rumble. With a diesel engine, the tow truck rounded the corner, its orange lights flashing, and pulled up in front of my house. The driver, a heavy-set man with a scruffy beard, stepped out and gave me a nod. "These are the ones?" he asked, gesturing toward the SUV and the sedan. "Yep," I replied. Unable to keep the satisfaction out of my voice, he got to work immediately, lowering the metal arms and sliding them under the SUV. The sound of chains clanking was music to my ears. For the first time since this nonsense started, I felt like I was winning. Of course, the commotion didn't go unnoticed. As the SUV's tires lifted off the ground, Karen's front door flew open. She came running out in slippers and a robe, her hair messy and her face still groggy from sleep. "Hey, what are you doing?" she screamed, her voice cracking. The tow driver didn't even flinch. "Ma'am, these cars are parked illegally in his driveway. They're being removed." Karen turned on me, her eyes wide with rage. "You called a tow truck? Are you insane? You can't do this." I folded my arms across my chest, steady in my tone. "I warned you, Karen. You ignored me. This is what happens when you don't listen." Before she could respond, her mum stormed out onto the porch, fully dressed like she had been waiting for a spotlight. She shrieked at the driver, waving her arms dramatically. "You can't touch our cars. This is harassment. We'll sue you, or everything you have." The tow driver shrugged, completely unfazed. "Take it up with the police, lady. I'm just doing my job." The neighborhood came alive with the noise. Curtains twitched, doors opened. A few neighbors even stepped out onto their porches pretending to water plants or check the mail while really just enjoying the show. I saw one man from across the street hiding a grin behind his coffee mug. People had been watching Karen and her mom's antics for years, and now they were finally seeing them face some consequences. As the SUV was secured to the truck, the driver moved on to the sedan. Karen ran to the car, fumbling for her keys. But it was too late. The driver blocked her path and shook his head. "Step back, ma'am. This one's going too." "You can't do this," she shrieked again, stomping her foot like a child denied candy. "This is illegal. You'll regret this." I couldn't help but laugh, a short, sharp laugh that broke the tension. "No, Karen," I said, my voice cutting through her protests. "What's illegal is trespassing on private property. You've been warned more than once. Now you're paying the price." Her mother tried a different tactic, lowering her voice and attempting to sound reasonable. "Look," she said to the driver, "we're good people. We've lived here a long time. Surely we can work something out. Maybe we just forget this ever happened and nobody gets in trouble." The driver didn't even glance at her. He tightened the chains around the sedan's wheels and hit the controls. The car rose slowly into the air, the hydraulics hissing. Karen screamed again, the sound carrying down the street like a siren dot, and then, just like that, it was done. Both cars were hooked, secured, and ready to be hauled away. The driver climbed back into his truck and gave me a nod. "You'll get the paperwork in the mail. They can pick their cars up at the lot once they pay the fees." I nodded back. "Thank you." As the truck pulled away, dragging the SUV and the sedan behind it, I felt a surge of satisfaction so strong it was almost overwhelming. For the first time, the balance of power had shifted. Karen and her mom weren't in control anymore. They stood in the middle of the street, stunned and furious, powerless to stop it. "You'll pay for this," Karen shouted after me as I turned to go back inside. "You'll regret messing with us," but her words didn't scare me. They didn't even bother me. All I felt was relief. For once, they had been forced to face consequences. Inside my house, I closed the door and leaned against it, letting out a long breath. My hands were still shaking, not from fear, but from the adrenaline of standing up to them and winning. For the first time since moving into the neighborhood, I felt like I belonged, like I didn't have to live under their shadow anymore. That night, the street was unusually quiet. No music blasting, no shouting, no cars blocking my driveway. But I knew it wasn't over. People like Karen and her mom didn't take humiliation lightly. They'd be plotting, scheming, looking for a way to strike back. And honestly, I was ready for it, because after that day, they weren't just my annoying neighbors anymore. They were my enemies, and I had no intention of losing the next round. The morning after the tow truck incident, the entire neighborhood seemed to buzz with a quiet kind of excitement. When I stepped outside to collect my mail, I could feel eyes on me. Neighbors waved a little longer than usual, smiles tugging at their lips. Even old Mr. Wilson, who never spoke more than a grunt, gave me a rare thumbs up from his porch. It was obvious everyone had seen what happened, and they loved it. For years, Karen and her mom had walked around like they owned the block, but finally, someone had stood up to them. I could almost feel the collective sigh of relief, like people had been waiting for this moment. But Karen and her mother didn't share that relief. By noon, I saw them storming up and down the street, their voices carrying through the air like sirens. They stopped neighbors in their driveways, ranting about the injustice and the harassment they had suffered. I watched from behind my curtains as they tried to rally sympathy, but it wasn't working. People nodded politely, then quickly found excuses to step back inside. Nobody wanted to be on their side. That evening, as I was bringing out the trash, Karen's mom spotted me. She marched across the street, heels clicking on the pavement, and pointed a manicured finger in my face. "You think you're clever, don't you?" she hissed. "You humiliated us in front of everyone." I calmly set the trash bag down by the curb. "You humiliated yourselves," I replied. "All I did was call a tow truck. You brought this on yourselves when you parked in my driveway." Her face twisted with fury, the kind that made her makeup crack around her eyes. "This isn't over," she spat. "You'll regret crossing us." Karen appeared a moment later, clutching her phone like it was a weapon. "We're talking to a lawyer," she said smugly. "You can't just tow people's cars. You'll be paying us damages when this is done." I wanted to laugh, but I kept my voice level. Good luck with that. The law's on my side. Then I turned and walked back to my house, refusing to give them the satisfaction of seeing me rattled. That night, I couldn't shake the uneasy feeling. Their threats lingered in my mind like a bad echo. People like them thrived on revenge. I knew they wouldn't let this go. The question wasn't if they'd retaliate, it was how. The answer came sooner than I expected. 2 days later, I woke up to find my mailbox knocked over, the metal post bent at an ugly angle. At first, I thought it might have been an accident, maybe. A car clipped it while turning, but when I looked closer, I saw the tire tracks on the curb, leading straight from Karen's house. My jaw tightened. It wasn't subtle, but then again, they weren't subtle people. I snapped a few pictures with my phone and straightened the mailbox as best I could. Calling the police over vandalism crossed my mind, but I knew they'd probably brush it off. As neighborly disputes, I needed something more solid if I wanted real consequences. Later that afternoon, I caught Karen's mom standing at the edge of her yard, watching me with a satisfied little smirk. She didn't say anything, but the message was clear. We did this, and you can't prove it. It was infuriating, but it also gave me clarity. If they wanted to play dirty, then fine. I could play smarter. The following week turned into a cold war. Every time I stepped outside, I felt their eyes on me. Their cars never returned to my driveway, but they found other ways to push buttons. They parked as close to my driveway as legally possible, sometimes inches from the curb, making it difficult to pull out. They'd blast music at random hours, loud enough to rattle my windows. Once Karen even left her garbage bags on my curb, pretending it was a mistake. Each time, I bit my tongue. Each time, I reminded myself not to act out of anger. They wanted me to snap, to overreact, to look like the unreasonable one. I wasn't going to give them that satisfaction. But while I kept calm on the outside, I started preparing on the inside. I bought a small security camera and mounted it near my porch, angled toward the street. It was subtle, almost invisible unless you knew where to look. Now, every time Karen or her mom walked by, I noticed their eyes flicker toward it nervously. They knew they were being watched. and that alone gave me some peace. One evening, as I sat on my porch with a book, Karen's mom strutted past and muttered loud enough for me to hear, "Pathetic, thinks he's the hero of the neighborhood. Just wait." Her words rolled off me like water, but deep down, I knew she meant them. They were planning something bigger, something louder. And as much as I hated to admit it, I was curious to see what they'd try next. The climax of their spite came the following weekend. I was hosting a small barbecue for a couple of friends, nothing big, just burgers, drinks, and a chance to unwind. As we laughed and ate in the backyard, I heard the sound of screeching tires out front. My stomach dropped instantly. I rushed around the house to find Karen and her mom parked across my driveway again, not in the driveway this time, but blocking it entirely from the street. They sat in their cars, engines idling, grinning like maniacs. My friends gathered behind me, stunned by the sheer audacity. "Are you kidding me?" I shouted over the noise. Karen rolled down her window and smirked. "What are you going to do? Call your little tow truck again? Try explaining that to your guests." Her mom honked the horn twice, laughing. "This is our neighborhood, sweetheart. You don't get to win here." My hands clenched into fists, but I forced myself to breathe. They wanted a reaction. They wanted me to look foolish in front of my friends. Instead, I pulled out my phone and dialed the non-emergency police line. When I explained the situation, the operator didn't hesitate. "We'll send someone over," she said. Karen and her mum must have realized what I was doing because their smug expressions faltered. Still, they didn't move. They sat there, determined to make their point. 10 minutes later, a patrol car rolled down the street. The officer stepped out, glanced at the scene, and shook his head. "Ladies," he said firmly, "you're obstructing a private driveway. That's a violation. Move your vehicles now or they'll be impounded." For once, neither of them had a snappy comeback. Their faces flushed red with humiliation as they reluctantly started their engines and pulled away. My friends erupted into laughter as the patrol car followed them down the street, ensuring they didn't try anything else. I stood there, a mix of relief and satisfaction flooding through me. This time, I hadn't just beaten them, I had embarrassed them in front of the very audience they'd hoped to impress. And as the night went on, I realized something important. Karen and her mother weren't invincible. They weren't untouchable. They were just bullies who had finally met someone who wouldn't back down. The war wasn't over, but for the first time I felt certain of the outcome. Because I wasn't just defending my driveway anymore. I was defending my place in this neighborhood, and I wasn't about to lose. For a while, things were strangely quiet after the police incident. Karen and her mom had been forced to move their cars in front of half the neighborhood, and that embarrassment seemed to sting more than anything else I had done. Their glares, it became sharper, their muttered comments louder, but they didn't block my driveway again, at least not right away. But people like them couldn't just let something go. The more time passed, the more I realized they were only biding their time, plotting the next move. And this time, it wasn't just about MIT, it was about control. They wanted to remind the whole neighborhood that they were the ones in charge. The first sign came on a Tuesday afternoon. I was raking leaves in the front yard when I saw Karen's mom approaching Mrs. Green, the sweet elderly woman who lived next door to them. From where I stood, I couldn't hear every word, but the body language told the story. Karen's mom gestured toward my house, whispering fiercely, her face twisted in disdain. Mrs. Green frowned, shook her head, and walked away without another word. Later that evening, I found out from another neighbor what she had been saying. According to her, I was dangerous, unstable, and the kind of man who ruined communities. She claimed I had harassed them for no reason and that towing their cars was an act of cruelty, not justice. It would have been laughable if it wasn't so calculated. They weren't just mad at me anymore, they were trying to turn the neighborhood against me, but the plan backfired. The more they talked, the more people saw them for what they were. Liars desperate to rewrite the story. Neighbors who had been silent before began stopping by my yard to offer small words of encouragement. One man even chuckled, "Don't let those two witches get to you. We've all been waiting years for someone to stand up to them." That support meant more than I expected. It reminded me that I wasn't alone in this fight. Still, Karen and her mom weren't done. The real escalation came that weekend. It was a Saturday night, close to midnight, when I was jolted awake by a loud bang. I jumped out of bed and rushed to the window. What I saw made my blood run cold. Someone had egged my house. Sticky yellow yolks dripped down my siding. The shells shattered across my front porch and driveway. The smell hit me even through the glass. My heart pounded as I scanned the street, and sure enough, I saw two figures in the distance, hurrying back toward Karen's house. The porch light flicked on just in time to reveal their silhouettes. It was them, Karen and her mother. I wanted to storm down the street right then, but instead, I grabbed my phone and pulled up the live feed from my security camera. There they were, clear as Dalafing, as they hurled the eggs. This time, I had evidence. I called the police again. An officer arrived about 20 minutes later, took one look at the mess, and shook his head. "We'll file a report," he said after I showed him the footage. "But vandalism cases like this are usually a slap on the wrist. Still, it's good you've got the camera. Keep recording." If this escalates, we'll have more to work with. His words were both reassuring and frustrating. A slap on the wrist wasn't enough, but I realized that wasn't the point. The point was building a case. Every petty act of revenge they committed was another nail in their coffin. The following morning, as I was scrubbing the dried egg off my siding, Karen strutted by in workout gear, sipping a smoothie. She paused just long enough to smirk at the mess. "Rough night?" she asked sweetly. I didn't look up. "Security cameras are great, aren't they?" I replied. "Especially when they catch everything." Her smile faltered for just a second, before she scoffed and walked away. That flicker of fear was enough to keep me going. By now, the neighborhood was fully aware of the feud. Some people pretended not to notice, but others took sides. A few neighbors openly avoided Karen and her mom, refusing to engage in their gossip campaigns. Others, the ones who always enjoy drama, lingered around to listen to their complaints, nodding along but never really committing. Then there were the kids. Teenagers from down the block had started making jokes, whispering "driveway queen" and "gold digger mom" whenever Karen and her mother walked by. I caught one boy even singing a mocking song about tow trucks as they passed. Watching their faces twist in humiliation was satisfying, but it also worried me. Humiliation made them reckless, and reckless people made dangerous enemies. Sure enough, things grew nastier. One evening I returned home from work to find a note taped to my door. The handwriting was messy, but the message was clear: "Leave this neighborhood or you'll be sorry." I took a picture, saved the note, and filed it with the rest of my evidence. Fear prickled at the back of my mind, but I refused to let them win by intimidation. I doubled down, bought another camera for the side of my house, and installed a motion-activated light by the driveway. If they wanted a war, I was going to make sure every battle was documented. At night, as I sat in my living room, lights dimmed, I thought about how quickly things had escalated. All of this over a driveway, but deep down, I knew it wasn't really about the driveway anymore. It was about control, about entitlement, about two women who couldn't handle the idea of someone standing up to them. And now, it wasn't just me standing up, it was the whole neighborhood. The turning point came during a neighborhood meeting a few days later. The HOA gathered in the community center to discuss routine issues: lawn care, garbage pickup, things like that. As soon as the floor was open for discussion, Karen's mom shot to her feet. "This man," she said, pointing straight at me, "has been harassing us nonstop. He's ruined our reputation, called the police on us, and poisoned this community with lies. He doesn't belong here." The room went silent. For a moment, I felt the weight of every eye on me. But before I could even respond, Mrs. Green stood up. Her voice shook with age, but her words were steady. "He hasn't ruined anything. You two have. We've lived under your bullying for years. And now, finally, someone had the courage to stop you." Murmurs of agreement rippled through the room. Another neighbor spoke up, then another. Before long, half the room was calling them out for their behavior. Stories of shouting matches, late-night music, broken fences, stolen packages, things I hadn't even known about. Karen and her mom stood frozen, their faces pale, as the tide of the neighborhood turned against them. I didn't even need to speak. The truth was already out. That night, walking home from the meeting, I realized something important. This fight was no longer just mine. The neighborhood had chosen a side, and it wasn't theirs. But something told me Karen and her mom wouldn't go quietly. If anything, this public humiliation would only make them more desperate, and desperate people were dangerous. The war wasn't finished. The final battle was still coming. The night after the HOA meeting, the neighborhood felt different. For months, Karen and her mother had strutted around like they ruled the block, but now the curtain had been pulled back. Their power was gone. Their neighbors no longer afraid of them. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that they weren't finished. Pride like theirs didn't crumble quietly, it exploded. I was right. 3 days later, I came home from work to find flashing lights painting the street red and blue. A police cruiser and a fire truck were parked outside Karen's house. Neighbors crowded on sidewalks, whispering in low voices, their eyes wide with curiosity. My stomach tightened as I parked my car and hurried over. The scene was chaos. Karen stood on the curb, her face pale and streaked with tears, while her mom shouted furiously at an officer. Behind them, the black luxury sedan sat in the driveway, its hood charred and smoking. The fire crew had already put out the flames, but the smell of burned rubber and melted plastic hung heavy in the air. I caught fragments of their screaming, words like arson and sabotage. Then Karen's mom pointed directly at me. "It was him," she shrieked. "He's been harassing us for months. He must have done this." The officer glanced at me, then back at her. "Ma'am, witnesses say they saw your daughter trying to rev the engine before it caught fire. Looks like a mechanical issue, not arson." Karen's mom froze, but Karen exploded. "That's a lie. They're all against us. He turned everyone against us." She jabbed her finger toward me again, her face contorted with rage. For a moment, I considered responding, but I didn't need to. The neighbors did it for me. From across the street, Mrs. Green raised her voice. "Enough. You've lied about him from the start. We all saw you egg his house. We all saw you block his driveway. And now you're making fools of yourselves again." Others chimed in, their voices firm, no longer afraid of backlash. We're tired of your games. You've been a menace for years. It's about time you faced consequences. Karen and her mum spun in circles, desperate for support, but found only glares and crossed arms. The community had spoken, and they were alone. The officer finally stepped in, his voice sharp. That's enough. If we get one more report of harassment, vandalism, or false accusations, charges will be filed. Do you understand? Karen's mom opened her mouth to argue, but the officer cut her off. I'm not asking, I'm telling. One more incident, and you'll both be in court. For the first time, they had no comeback. No smirks, no sneers, just silence. Over the next week, their world crumbled. The HOA fined them for repeated disturbances. Neighbors stopped acknowledging them entirely. No more polite waves, no more forced small talk. They became ghosts in their own kingdom, isolated in a place they once thought they ruled. The final blow came when a for sale sign appeared in their yard. I noticed it early one morning, leaning against the trimmed grass like a white flag of surrender. Whispers spread quickly. They couldn't handle the pressure anymore. The humiliation was too much. The isolation unbearable. They were leaving the day the moving truck arrived. The neighborhood gathered in small clusters, watching quietly as box after box was loaded up. Karen stomped around furiously, barking orders, while her mother kept her sunglasses on her face. Hidden, I stood on my porch, arms folded, saying nothing. At one point, Karen caught my eye. For just a second, her expression softened, not in apology, but in defeat. She opened her mouth as if to speak, then shut it again and climbed into the SUV. Moments later, the truck rumbled away, carrying with it the noise, the drama, and the entitlement that had poisoned our street for so long. When the last car disappeared, around the corner, the neighborhood erupted in quiet celebration. People cheered, some clapped, and others simply sighed with relief. Mrs. Green came over and patted my shoulder. You did it, she said warmly. You stood up, and now we can all breathe again. But I shook my head. It wasn't just me, I replied. We all stood up. They lost because nobody was afraid of them anymore. That night, for the first time in months, I sat on my porch in peace. No loud music, no glares, no tension humming through the air. Just the quiet sound of crickets and the gentle rustle of leaves. My driveway was empty and it was mine again. I realized then that the battle hadn't been about cars at all. It was about respect, about boundaries, about proving that no matter how entitled someone acts, they don't get to take what isn't theirs. Karen and her gold-digger mom had thought they were untouchable, but in the end, they weren't brought down by me or even the tow truck. They were brought down by themselves, their arrogance, their selfishness, their inability to change. And as the stars shone above the quiet street, I felt a sense of closure settle in. The war was over. The queens of the neighborhood had been dethroned and peace had returned. For the first time, this place truly felt like home.